Good morning. Happy Mother's Day. My name is John Clum. I'm a member of the Adult Education Committee, and like Kat, I am a theater person. So my job today is just to sort of be interlocutor. I'm going to ask Kat some questions, and then we'll open it up to you. And feel free as we go along. If you have any questions, just raise your hand and we'll take them really at any time as well as Kat and I converse about this. As you know, Perseverance of the Saints, I used to study Elizabethan drama, I keep thinking it's Perseverance, but Perseverance of the Saints started here at the church and moved down to the Methodists. But it's had a long and interesting history. So I wanted to start, this is Kat Evans, if you don't know her.
Hi, friends online. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, and Kat, as you know, has been very active in the theater community in Chicago. So here we go. First of all, how did you get involved in this?
The original research for this play was commissioned by Fourth as part of the 150th celebrations. I was on the committee, and as part of the brainstorming of, what can we do? We had about a year to plan, and we were like, how can we celebrate our 150th anniversary? And at one point, I offhandedly, expecting everyone to say, yeah, sure, that was a lovely idea. I said, well, we could have a play. And the committee said, yes, we should have a play. And I put together a little list of playwrights we could commission and, put together a little proposal and said, here are some people we could call. And they said, you should do it, Kat Evans. And I said, well, I'm qualified, but I'm a nobody. I mean, I can. I was trained in this. I have postgraduate degrees in this. I am a playwright, but we're Fourth. Don't we want big, important people to do this? And they're like, no, Kat Evans, you should do it. And that was really wonderful that the committee believed in me and wanted it done. And this is all during lockdown, mind you. This was when nobody could leave their houses at all. And so the original research and the original play, which was just called Heresy, 1874. We did a reading of it here in the Borwell dining room in February of 2022. Since then, the church passed on the project. We had a reading and we had a lot going on. We had transition of leadership and many other things. So then the script just became mine, and I wasn't able to put it down, and kept revising it and kept changing it, and it became what it is now, which is Perseverance of the Saints.
Was it your idea to pick this subject?
Indeed. As part of the committee work, I researched all 150 years of our history. I found many wonderful stories and lots of exciting tidbits of information. There are so many plays we could write. This was the one that just captured me right off the bat. I went, a heresy trial? Our pastor? Too progressive? What? And I court drama? I just thought, this thing's gonna write itself. This story just gripped me, and I couldn't let it go, or it wouldn't let me go. And nothing else gripped me in our history like this. But if you ever want to sit around and talk about Fourth history, I'm full of stories now.
Where did you find the information about it? I mean, were there...
Yeah, I have an extensive bibliography. If anyone's interested, I can send that out. So we have a lovely coffee table book that used to be given to every member when we joined. So I have one in my home. There's a lovely book by Jim Wellman that was very much about the 20th century. He divided up the 20th century with our pastors and did a long study of our history, which is called The Gold Coast Church and the Ghetto. That's a great one. Our Republic of Suffering by Drew Gilpin Faust, which was about the Civil War and death and how American attitudes towards death changed. That was influential on me. I was granted interviews by Ken Sawyer at McCormick Theological Seminary, by Carl Smith, who wrote 2 books about the Great Chicago Fire. He's an alum from Northwestern, an amazing historian. I read a lot. There is a Presbyterian history archive in Philadelphia. I was able to use it online. And again, keep in mind, I was doing all my research during lockdown, so I could not visit any libraries. I was granted one access to our archive here at Fourth and was able to look at the session minutes from that era, handwritten session minutes, and every signature. It was amazing. I couldn't believe I got to touch these artifacts that we still have from 1874 before and after. So yes, and if anyone's interested, I can share my bibliography. It's a little bit like a dissertation at this point.
Yeah, it's very difficult to turn all this history into a play. And how did you go about taking all this knowledge and sort of distilling it into a script?
Well, if any of you were here for the first reading of Heresy, 1874, you'll know it read much more like a history lesson. I had a lot of direct address to the audience, a lot of narration, a lot of, okay, let me explain what this happened, and then we'll get back to the characters who talk to each other. And I just felt such a deep responsibility to explain our history. And then as the play took shape, it became more about the characters who talk to each other. It became less about the trial and more about the community that the trial affected. The people who love this church and keep it going and wanted it to be whatever they wanted it to be. I cared more and more about them. And if you've seen the play, especially the ladies, they became more and more important to me. And the trial, as I said, originally I thought, oh, this writes itself. I have the entire transcript. It's at least 600 pages of the transcript of the trial. So at first I was like, snippety snip, boom, there it is. And the trial scenes became less and less, and the scenes with the people of the church, many of whom I made up, became more and more, and their story and the stories that I wanted to tell of the hearts and the bodies that were moving and shaking and trying to keep this place going, those became more and more important to me.
You suggested you made up some of these characters. Were Ellen and Maggie based on any real people?
Great question. Maggie definitely existed. All I know about Maggie was that she had not only one sister, but two sisters. There were 3 Miss Dixons, and all I know about them was that they followed Swing, but that they were members of our church, they were all unmarried, and that when the split happened and Swing started his new church, they followed him. And as you probably all know, my adoration for Rebecca Dixon, who's sitting here, and I went, oh, Dixon? And I took a photo of those names, and I sent it to Rebecca, and I thought, oh, I gotta put this in the play. Jenny, I know a little bit more about. Jenny Anderson was the first missionary that the ladies of Fourth sent abroad entirely with money that they raised. And she is in the Presbyterian archive. She worked in China alone for almost 20 years. Oh. Eventually, some other missionary man with his wife came along, and then the wife died, and so Jenny married that guy, and then she died not long after. That's all we really know about Jenny, was just that the Fourth Ladies sent her to China in 1879. I added to Jenny a story that I found, which you might be able to have seen this too, about there were these stories of young unmarried ladies who would keep pistols or other kinds of guns in their hand mufflers because the journey to Fourth was dangerous. And so all through church service, as they had their little hand muffler, there was a gun, they were packing. And as soon as I found that story, I was like, oh, that's going in. So I added that to Jenny, so she's a composite in that way. If you're curious, the only 2 people on stage that I completely made up are Ace Hurlbut, the doctor, he didn't really exist, and Mrs. Lee, the lady who was taking the verbal slingshots from her wheelchair, her rocking chair. Yeah, she didn't really exist. But everybody else on stage at least was a person who existed that went to Fourth or was part of the trial.
And I guess you had to do a fair amount of research on the McCormicks, too.
I did. And
their relationship to the church.
Mm-hmm.
One question I had as I listened to watched the play the other night and had read the script of the play. Personally, how much has this project in any way affected your sense of this church or your relationship to the church and the church's history?
When I first showed up here in 2006, my first thought was, they're going to learn what tax bracket I live in and they're going to kick me out. I didn't think I could possibly belong to a church like this. It just seems so big and so important, and I just felt like such a nobody. And I'm a theater person. I'm a bohemian. I really didn't think I would ever belong. And you know what? I never even shopped. I didn't go anywhere else. So, and because Fourth is huge, I found my niche right away with the young adults. At that time, we were called The Gathering, and they were my friend group. And it was a huge shock to me when they tapped me for deacons. And I said, oh, no, that's ridiculous. You don't want me. I'm not church leadership material. That's ridiculous. And the nominating committee said, oh, yes, you are, Kat Evans. We know you. And so anyway, this is all to say, when I was tapped for the 150th committee and began to do this research, and I just began to feel more and more like, this is my home. And we are a huge church, and we are a well-resourced church compared to most of our fellows. There's a lot going on in the presbytery, right? There's a lot going on nationally, and we have a place in that. So my understanding of Presbyterianism and how we operate as a people and the difficulties, the messiness, the difficulties of bureaucracy, the difficulties and the importance of our structure, all of those things have been drilled home into me, and it feels very strange that I'm still like, yes, this is my home. Even though it is huge, we remain huge, and our connection to others is still huge. And so I feel like that may be a convoluted answer, but my understanding of our structure is obviously solidified and deep and nuanced, and I care very deeply about our national dialogue as well as our home-based dialogue. We disagree on all kinds of stuff here, right here in these classrooms, right here in our committees. We disagree all the time, sometimes quite fiercely, and those issues matter to me, and I've just deepened my need and resolve to stick around.
The other question I had, and then we can open it up to all of you, this is always a question for playwrights. Plays seem to take forever to develop and to get to where the playwright really would dream of the play being. What do you see as the future of the play now? What would you want to do with it? Where would you like to see it go? What would you like to see happen?
It's a big play. It has a cast of, it needs at least 12 actors. It's a historical drama. It needs the kind of play or theater that likes big sets and big casts. So, of course, what playwright wouldn't love to see their play at the Goodman, right? The Goodman has the size and the grandeur of a play like this. But here in Chicago, we have an incredible storefront scene. So a theater like Timeline, I think, would be a perfect fit. They love history. They love Chicago. Stage Left is a really great, go ahead.
What about Court?
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. The Court would be a dream.
Well, I have somebody you might want to talk to.
Oh, yeah, Jane does come around with the microphone. So yes, the Court Theater, so any of those would be amazing. I also think that the play is ideal for readings. It doesn't have to have the grandeur of big sets and beautiful corsets and hoop skirts and the whole thing. I think it's a talky play. It could be a radio kind of reading, and I think church spaces could use it as educational matter for meetings. I think high schools I'm a graduate of Calvin College, now Calvin University, right? Dort and Wheaton and the kind of Christian education institutions that have theater departments. I know Northwestern College in Iowa has a great theater department. I feel like those kinds of institutions that are usually looking for opportunities for actors, so they want bigger casts, they have the resources for big sets, because a lot of professional theaters are going to see a cast of 13 and go, how do I pay for all those actors? But go ahead.
Yeah.
And here's a microphone for you.
Do I need it?
Yeah, especially for the people on Zoom.
Sorry about that. Last 3 years we've been going to Chautauqua
Oh, say
And-
more.
Well, and actually, while you think we all can be cost conscious, and as you know, actually here at Fourth we have a tradition of readers' theater. They do stagings of new works, and again, just readings. Theater is one of their pillars, one of the 4 pillars of Chautauqua. They're celebrating actually their 150th anniversary this year.
Wow.
But that would be a place, I think, that would appreciate. I don't know if you know Chautauqua. They have Presbyterian House, and it was started by several Methodist school teachers 150 years ago gathered on Lake Chautauqua, and that's where Chautauqua Institute came from.
Years ago, I have an earlier play that I wrote about Annie Oakley. And I used to do this solo show on the history of Annie Oakley. And to understand it in the marketing materials, we called it a Chautauqua.
Well, Chautauqua was also a performance.
Yeah.
Where in Ashland, Oregon, where the Oregon Shakespeare Festival is, that was a Chautauqua site.
Right.
So, we got entertainment and information in different ways then. And you would have, in fact, my drama teacher in high school was on the Chautauqua circuit. But yeah, entertainment, speeches, debates, whatever. There was a circuit. And now there are still, besides the main Chautauqua Institute in New York, very western New York, Erie, Pennsylvania is the closest big city. There are some others around the country still, yeah.
So that sounds like an amazing possibility. So we should talk later.
Is there anything you want to do to the play now, or are you happy with it as it is?
Oh, it's still going to get tweaked. I'm never done. Yeah, I have cuts in my head. I still have, but mostly right now I just think that there's some trimming I need to do. I don't know that there's any major directions or huge structural things I need to change. I think I can make a few more snippety snips, a little shorter.
Karen, can you tell us how it came to be presented at the Methodist Church and how you pulled together the actors to...
Sure, yeah. The creation of theater is not easy. So I have been friends with Eric Nussbaum, who is the director of music, or the minister of music at First United Methodist at Chicago Temple. He and I have been friends for years. And he knew of the project and knew that I've been working on it. And he said, why don't you just do it here? And I said, well, where are we going to find this money? And he helped me find this grant. There's a Chicago Temple fund. And you have to have some sort of connection to the Methodist Church and hopefully to that space, and you have to be endorsed by somebody at that church. And usually the grant is for, it's just some sort of charitable work in town, but they do and have covered arts events before. And so I was able to get that grant, but I was only able to get the grant because I filed with a group called Fractured Atlas, which is an organization in New York State that helps solo artists have the status of a 501c3. Because there are a lot of grants out there that I could never apply for because they are for not-for-profits. I am not a not-for-profit. I have no board. I have no mission. Right? I'm just a solo artist. But Fractured Atlas, they will act as your grant custodian and lend you their 501c3 status. So I was able to apply for the grant, get it. It went to Fractured Atlas, and then for every expense that I incurred with the play, I send them the paperwork, and then they pay me to pay whoever I hired. So that's a lengthy process of money changing hands, but it all is legal. And also, in order to even begin with Fractured Atlas, I had to raise money on my own to prove to them that I could. So I did solicit private donations that went to Fractured Atlas, and they held the money until I got to a certain level. So there were also many people who are listed in the program that donated to the project. Oh, and then getting the actor as well, I just worked my network. I've worked as an actor in this town since 2006, and I know wonderful, wonderful actors. And of course I know amazing actors who are busy, so I wasn't able to get everybody I wanted every time. And even in the process, I lost some actors to other projects. So every actor you saw on stage got paid. Our sound designer got paid. Our camera switcher for the live feed got paid. First United Methodist got paid. Everybody who was part of this received a stipend. Did that answer your question?
So it's true not-for-profit theater, all the way. And the Methodist Temple has a history of theater. There is a theater in the basement of Methodist Temple. There used to be a wonderful theater company down there, Silk Road Rising, for many, many, many years. So, and an opera festival did a production there last year. Reagan.
Thank you. I just love this. You know, I had to go back and see it again on Tuesday, and then I was dead tired. But I had to sit in a different section of the church so that I could hear what I couldn't have heard sitting in another section. It wasn't the hearing, it was the issues, right? So I think this would be great at Timeline, because they explain the history at Timeline, they do a big thing. But I myself don't kind of believe in that, I think when you go to the theater, if you don't understand, you just go home and look it up, like I had to do with Joe Turner. Anyway, but I'm so proud of you, and you're so smart. I mean, the dialogue is so smart. John clued me into this, a while ago, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go see it. But the the issues that are in there, the way you put them together, and then sort of one right after another, not just the trial, but people talking about the issues. I was really surprised at how modern, or I should say how we're still arguing about the same things, using different words, right? There's no but. What I need is the script. Is the script available? I know you're going to have it copyrighted, but I'm, willing to pay for it, and I know a lot of people who would like to have it too.
Yeah, if I could find a publisher, that would be amazing.
Okay.
I feel like as a Presbyterian artifact in our national discourse, I think if I could find a publisher, that would be amazing. In the meantime, I'm going to put it up on this thing called New Play Exchange, which is where playwrights put their work. So it will be available soon once I make a few more snippety snips. But I saw a hand here and I saw a hand here.
So a statement and then a question. And the statement is, I so appreciated your shout out to the Methodist Church for the change that they have made in their situation as far as LGBT people. I thought that was great. Thank you so much for doing that. Secondly, is the McCormicks that are referenced in the play the senior McCormicks, not the McCormick associated with this building and...
Yes, the people who are in the play are Cyrus, who was the major rehab designer of The Reaper, who really built the McCormick fortune, and his wife Nettie, who was huge in this church. Without her, we would never have had what this church became in the 20th century. But it was her son, Cyrus Jr., that did a lot of, got John Timothy Stone to come here. But Nettie, she was amazing and did incredible things for Chicago and this church. And she, in some ways, ruled in the background, and in other ways, ruled with an iron fist. Does that answer your question? Okay, I really want to get to Marilyn.
She was 30 years younger than her husband.
Correct.
She didn't die till what, 19...
That's right. So, since you didn't have a microphone.
Dedicated to her. Her children bought windows. I'm sorry. Nettie was about 25 or 30 years younger than Cyrus. He died in 1876 or something, quite soon. Yeah, 1871, just after the fire. 84. Anyway, that's kind of a point, because she was still a force long after he died, using his money, of course.
Yeah, well, and when Cyrus Sr. died, the decision by the McCormick family was that Nettie would head up all philanthropy, while Cyrus Jr. headed up all business. So Nettie, who had been doing a lot for the McCormick Reaper businesses and rebuilding and construction, she'd been highly involved. She said, I'm happy to step back from that. I just want to help the world. I will work on philanthropy. And she funded many, many things. Cyrus Jr. went on to be a taskmaster and a very difficult employer in Chicago, and was very problematic with the Haymarket and many other labor disputes. Worth checking it out.
And actually, that sounds like a great idea for a play.
Indeed. Yeah. Go ahead.
This may be an unfair question. If so, you could just shoot me the raspberries. But the subject of the play, and you've been involved with this church for quite a while now, so you have a pretty good perspective on it. What would you say was our contemporary heresy at Fourth? Is that unfair or what?
Do we have any current heresies? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Oh. What are we doing at Fourth where we might get a little slap on the wrist? I mean, well, from what I understand, and I know many of you have been here longer than I, we were ordaining and marrying LGBTQ folks before a lot of other folks caught on, right? And I understand when I was doing my research, there were stories about Kathy Kidder, getting wedding requests and saying, well, it's not quite legal in the state of Illinois yet, but would you like me to put you on a waiting list? Because we'd love to do it once it's legal, and things like that. So I know at one point we were slightly ahead of the national discourse and maybe some of the religious discourse, so that happened in my lifetime. In terms of right now, I don't know if we're doing anything incredibly suspect, but I love this question, actually. I do think we as a church are rethinking a lot about how we do everything. We're rethinking how we do mission. We're rethinking how we relate to our neighbors. We're rethinking how we do church. And I'm sure you can tell how influenced I am by Shannon and her time here. I got real swept up in a lot of the things that she was encouraging us to think. So I don't know if any of it would be tapped as heresy, except if you go on Twitter, if you go online and you listen to some of the Christian nationalist, like Christian white supremacy nationalist discourse right now, everything we do at Fourth is suspect, right? The fact that I could sit here with a microphone as a woman, this is suspect. That there are still plenty of people in this country that, are telling women that all we are here for is breeding, that we have no minds to cultivate, that we have no leadership qualities. There are plenty of folks who would push us in oppressive directions if they could. So I feel like, at Fourth we have lots of disagreements and we have lots of, I don't know if controversy is the right word, but we tussle over what we think and how we want to do things. But there's a lot of national discourse that gets violent and is ready to set us back centuries. So to them, I'm sure we're full of heresy.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Well, I was more concerned about internecine, I realize the national religious sentiment is pretty much Fourth Church bashing. I get that. I was talking about, can you think of an issue, because as I understand the play, it was really a schism of people within the church. So I was just thinking, in your experience at Fourth, can you think of one or maybe two instances in which we made, that is a serious issue that would cause such a schism? That was my question, like in-house stuff.
Another historic one is World War II, which is when the vote was whether or not to allow a Japanese congregation to worship here or not. Oh, okay. And that came within one vote. It was broken by the pastor at the time. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's a really good question that I should think more about. Thank you for posing it.
I would suggest that in your play, you talk about part of the heresy of swing was that he sort of aligned with other churches. Well, we're doing that now. We have dialogue with our Asian friends and our Islam churches, so that might be considered a similar kind of heresy today.
Yeah, our interfaith dialogue, I'm sure to other folks, is quite suspect.
Well, we've always worshiped with the synagogue and with St. Pat's. And again, as you said in your play, the fact that Protestants and Catholics could mix. Hey.
Yeah, I did with some of my trusted readers that I had as I shaped the play. I did put it in several Catholic hands, and they all said, "Oh yeah, please don't shy away from the fact that Catholics and Protestants used to murder each other every day. It feels so. We feel like such easy neighbors now." but a lot of them lived through, not being allowed to socialize, not being allowed to marry, being immediately, discriminated against, right? Just for trying to be friendly with our Catholic neighbors, which here at Fourth today, that seems so easy, where we're so close.
I was thinking that, in response to your question, Marilyn, that I think heresy is a word that Presbyterians would have great trouble using nowadays, because it reeks of certain sort of punishments and judgments and doctrinal ossification that I think we wouldn't want to represent now. But there are controversies within this church. There were a lot of people very upset when we had a trans guest speaker last summer. And there are moments in which the ministry hears about people within the church who say, I'm going to withdraw my money, or I'm going to not come back, or I'm going to do something on the basis of things that happen in the church. I had a long talk with John Buchanan a few weeks ago about the history of LGBT things in this church, and what a controversy that was that he steered the church through back in the day. That all started, by the way, when an employee of the church got AIDS, got HIV-related infections, and how the church was going to deal with that, which led to all sorts of other things that led to the church's moves on LGBTQ issues. But I think now we certainly have controversies, and we certainly have disagreements, but heresy is just a word that I think we might think is medieval now. Yeah. It certainly was an active 19th century word, but
well, evangelicals still consider gay people to be heretics.
oh yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, if you look at the right-wing white nationalist people, they still think, because they read the Bible literally, that anything to do with gay or trans is truly heretical. If you want to relegate that word to the 19th century, go ahead, but not everybody's doing that.
No, but I was saying within this church, I think heresy is a word we would have great trouble using. Within.
It could be used as a weapon against us, nonetheless.
Yeah, no, oh yes, but internally, right. I think it's Reagan.
I just want to say heresy would be, for instance, if the PCUSA had a policy or passed something at the General Assembly that we weren't doing, we could be accused of heresy at this church. And that, in fact, is happening. We're just not being accused of it. There are a lot of things that the General Assembly, not a lot, but a few things, have passed, right, as, one of them, if I may, is land acknowledgements. They passed this thing saying all churches should be engaged in a land acknowledgement and, with their native neighbors or whoever are the land ancestors. We're not doing that, right? So that would be a case where if people are inclined, could be brought up on heresy. Not giving you any ideas or anything, Kat.
They won't be burning us at the stake, however, I don't think yet.
I would love to hear if anybody wants to talk about their emotional experience watching the play or about those characters, or is there something in your questions, John?
I'd love to hear people's responses.
Hang on. The microphone cometh.
I mean, one that my husband and I talked about afterwards, we ran into somebody else who had seen the play, maybe the Broders, or anyway, and that moment where the wife totally loses it because of the trial. The trial, that damn trial, and suddenly, because of the trial, we can't do what we need to be doing, which is helping people, which is what we're here to do as a church. And so, to your point, you're right. The goings on, how you described the journey with what it was about. It was not so much anymore about the trial. It was about the impact this obsession with the trial was having on the ministry and life of the church. But when she did that, I mean, it was just so riveting and amazing.
And Julia Kessler, she's an incredible actor here in Chicago. I was really lucky to get her for Mrs. Mulligan. Thank you. Does anyone else have any moments in the play you wanted to talk about?
I really loved when Mrs. McCormick came into the scene. It was so dramatic that it made me think, oh yeah, there's people like this in the church now, I'm sure. But what a force she was, and and how they all responded to her. I felt the same, in each response that came out from the other actors. I kind of felt the same without even, knowing what they know, so to speak. But, it made her entry made me afraid for the others, right?
Yeah.
Good, it was great, yeah.
And I'll tell you a quick story. So at the original Heresy 1874 reading in Borwell, I reserved that role for myself. I played Mrs. McCormick, and when I came out and one actor said, "Oh, hello, Mrs. McCormick," and I heard the audience go, "Oh," and I thought, "Oh, this is it. I'm keeping this. This is power." I felt like I struck upon the correct ending, which was this surprise ending and yet a thing that maybe we should have seen coming all along. And I was like, all right, great. Thank you for the response. Perfect. And yes, it was a little hard to give up the role, but I do think Jen Mickelson was dynamite as Mrs. McCormick.
Yeah, I've loved that, Mrs. McCormick's part in the play too, because it raises that whole church, about the whole question of who is the power in the church, the minister or the person with the biggest checkbook? And certainly in the 19th century too, this was a very large issue with churches and neighborhoods like this. And I just, to me, that's sort of the apex of the play.
Yeah, and if I may, just a little more history tidbit. One major thing I uncovered, so this wasn't me making a discovery, right? This has been published by other scholars, but I found out that Nettie McCormick and much of the McCormick family actively rewrote history to make Cyrus look less Confederate-oriented. They very specifically hired biographers and changed the public legacy because they didn't want to be on that side of history. They just were like, never mind, that didn't happen. And in that time without an internet, whoever published won the day in terms of how people understood the national discourse. And so this quote that the McCormick Reaper saved the Union because it increased food supplies, that is from a patent trial where a lawyer was suing to try to go after McCormick device patents, copyright law kind of stuff, right? And they made this argument many, many, many years after, but someone got a hold of it and decided, oh, yep, that's the legacy, and became this general understanding of how people understood the Reaper and its history. And I found this fascinating, and a lot of this whole history about the actual Reaper being designed by Joe Anderson, who was Cyrus's black manservant that he grew up with. The entire McCormick fortune was built on the labor and the expertise of a black man, and they lived in a hovel Joe and his family lived in a hovel on Cyrus's land in Virginia. And from what I understand Joe never had a bad thing to say about Cyrus, but I was encouraged to learn this history from McCormick Theological Seminary, Ken Sawyer especially, but they at the seminary said, you need to look into this. You need to know about these other stories. And when I looked into them, I thought, oh, this is important. We need to have better, clearer stories of how we got here. And so while some people along the journey have said, oh, the trial's over, why do you still have a half an hour of play? I was like, oh, this is important. Mrs. McCormick is staying.
That just reminds me of, they always say the victors get to write history.
Yep, that's a good, thank
Yeah.
you for putting a button on that for me.
Anyway.
I just wanted to say that, I'm a retired physician, and one of the most important aspects of my life, especially being in retirement, is going to the theater and enjoying the genius of people like you. And so thank you for that. I greatly appreciate artists and people that teach the work. I don't know what I could do without you. That being said, without getting in too much into the weeds, I've always wondered, and I'm sure that this varies from playwright to playwright, but do you sit down and make an outline of what you want to do, or you say, well, you've read all this, you've done all this historical research, you say, well, I want these characters, and so you put the characters down on paper, you say, well, how can I envelop these into a lucid storyline? So is it the outline that comes first, or is it, I really, really love Mrs. McCormick, and how do I fit her into this storyline? I'm trying to get into your mind a little bit.
The playwriting process is a blessed, difficult cycle of ecstasy and misery, right? Which I think is probably true for most writing of any large piece of work. So for me, yes, I was swimming in research, and I began this particular play with which moments could I just feel like they wrote themselves. So the very first scene that I wrote in this play was someone coming from the Presbyterian meeting to the elders and saying, Swing has been charged with heresy, and just watching the elders go, what? That to me was the first thing where I'm like, oh, I know how to write that scene. So that was the first thing I wrote. And I remember Rob Kuhn, who was helping me in that original research, he was like, you're not gonna put this scene out in the actual play, but it's good that you started there. But it stuck. It changed a lot. I mean, I had scenes where I had swing at the Wednesday night debates with lots of young men around and all kinds of lectures going on, and they got snippety-snipped, right? There's a lot that I wrote that didn't end up in the play, and But you had a basic outline. I didn't. Once I had a full draft, then I take my scenes and I put them on index cards and I put them on a push pin board, and I'm often moving things around. But for me, I go with moments that to me are important, and I just write them, and the characters begin to speak, and I just vomit it out, and then I see what I have, and then from there I add structure. That's my process. I'm sure other playwrights are more structure first, dialogue later.
That was always mine, too.
Yeah.
You
But structure is important, and I'm grateful for my training in structures to help me in that refining process.
But structure often comes later, after you hear voices or pick a moment and write the play out from that moment. Rebecca has a question.
Well, on the same topic, Kat, often an accomplished writer, who's been at it for 30 years and has 12 publishers and so forth, has one publisher, has a favorite editor. Did you have anyone else off whom you bounced your ideas to see if you were staying on track, if you had excluded something that was probably basic to the story, who said, okay, enough already, Kat, let's move on? Was there anyone else who could do that or
Sure.
did do that?
Yes, I did do audience feedback surveys with the reading that we did here in Borwell with that original Heresy script. Terry McCabe, who is the director that has hired me as an actor more than any other here in Chicago at City Lit Theater, Terry McCabe, I trust him, I trust he's a new works champion. He built his career at Victory Gardens many, many years ago on the creation of new work and the championing of Chicago playwrights. So he was one of my sounding boards. Brian Pastor, who is the incoming artistic director of City Lit, they are one of my sounding boards. I had done a play called Gross Indecency, The Three Trials of Oscar Wilde. And Moises Kaufman, I think, is the gold standard for docudrama or plays that are about history. So highly, that first draft of Heresy 1874 was very Moises Kaufman-esque. because I just thought that's how you write a history play in that way. Eventually, I went much more towards your traditional American canon, Arthur Miller. These are just characters in rooms talking to each other. I had no more narrators, no more direct address, fourth wall realism. That's the way I ended up going. But anyway, to answer your question, Terry McCabe, Brian Pastor, audience feedback here, and then every workshop that I did with my actors, which after we did one here, they were all just held at my house. I just would check with my actors and say, what are you feeling? What are you noticing? Ellie Maitland is one of my best friends. She's a Foley artist here in town, but like her script advice is invaluable. So I checked with her. Luke Beasley, my roommate, and Adam, my fiance, they've been with me for every draft, and I'm always listening to them. So I have a lot of people I bounce ideas off of.
Any other questions?
What's next?
For this script, for me, I do have acting roles booked for the rest of the year. So thank you. Yeah, I'll be back on stage. I can't actually announce them yet. The castings haven't been announced, but yeah. So I have a role that will be performing late August, early September, and I have another role that will be performing in January through February, upon which I take a little break and I get married. So. Oh, that's right. I do teach. I teach at IIT. I am the playwriting professor at a big tech school now. So I'll be increasing my load, teaching introduction to theater and theatrical texts and dramaturgy, as well as playwriting at IIT. So I hope the pre-meds and the coders and the architects and all those different tech students, I'm the one place where they get to express themselves.
Any chance it's ever going to be here?
This play? I'm open.
I mean, it would be so wonderful to take some of the issues, because there are many, like just perseverance of the saints. Who knew that was the issue? And discuss it, right?
Yeah.
In a discussion group, it would be fabulous, really.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm currently on adult ed, so we could talk about that. Go ahead. Hang on. Oh, the microphone cometh.
We did this during Lent with Job, the JB by Archibald MacLeish. We did it this was when Linda Loving was here, and we did it in Blair Chapel, which no longer is, so that'll tell you. But we did that for 4 weeks, but we also allowed time after each one to do a talk back and talk about kind of the issues of that evening. So we made the play stretch over longer, but we kind of discussed it as we went along.
I have a sort of secret agenda to get drama back on some kind of schedule in this church. It's been missing since I got here. And
Well, we used to have a thing called Fourth Acts, and I can tell you about Fourth Acts.
I know about it. John Shearer's told me about it, but I think we need to get something like that back.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
So,
I-
Barb
I'd be-
Jobson, when I just arrived at Fourth, it was 2006. I had just come on the scene, and immediately people are saying, "Oh, what are you into? Oh, you're an actor. Well, there's this thing called Fourth Acts. You should show up to this meeting." And I thought, "Oh boy, what am I doing?" And within one meeting, I was cast as Charlotte Cushman and I don't know if it was Eleanor Aduza or something in a play that was about Fourth and how the pastor. I don't know if it was pre-John Tim.
That was done for the Center for Life and Learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was about the pastor before John Timothy Stone who decided theater was suspect and decided to take out editorial war against the theater, which seemed really ironic that Fourth had been meeting in a theater after the Chicago fire. So then the theater owner took out editorial war against him, and they had this little back and forth. And Barb Jobson wrote this entire script using our archival artifacts. And I got to be a part of it and got to already dive in with a history about our church. It was a lovely little script.
Oh.
And Sue Palau was our
Pello, Sue Pello.
Thank you.
Sue joined in the 90s. We were doing this, and then because she was teaching out at Aurora, she ended up taking over and becoming the director of.
She was wonderful to work with, and cast me as Anne Boleyn against Roger as King Henry VIII, which was lots of fun. Well, obviously, I am available if anybody wants to talk further. I want to thank John for being a champion of the project and for being here to work with us today.
Thank you, my friend. Thank Kat. This great.
And thank you all for coming today. It was great to chat with you. Thanks for coming online, friends.